Before the world was engulfed in flames, Margaret Dryburgh lived a life defined by care, compassion, and quiet determination. Born in 1900 in Sunderland, England, she grew up in a modest household where faith, discipline, and kindness shaped her character. From a young age, Margaret displayed an innate desire to help others, tending to neighbours, volunteering in local clinics, and absorbing every lesson in service and empathy that her family and school offered. By the time she entered nursing school, she had already decided that her life would be dedicated to healing the sick and supporting the vulnerable. She quickly proved herself not only capable, but extraordinary. Meticulous in her work, patient with the suffering, and unshakably calm under pressure. In the late 1920s, a sense of adventure and duty called her to Singapore, then part of the British Empire. There she joined the Anglican mission hospitals, working in tropical wards where disease, heat, and poverty made every day a struggle. Nurses like Margaret were not merely medical staff, they were pillars of the community, providing care, hope, and guidance in a land far from home. Her colleagues noticed her quiet leadership and unflappable spirit. Even amidst the challenges of overcrowded wards and limited resources, Margaret found ways to teach younger nurses, organise patients, and lift spirits. Little did anyone know that these qualities would prepare her for the greatest challenge of her life, the approaching storm of war. By the late 1930s, tension in Southeast Asia was rising. Japan's imperial ambitions were clear, and whispers of conflict reached the colonial offices and mission hospitals alike. Margaret, like many others, could sense that the calm before the storm was ending, though no one could imagine the horrors that would follow. She continued her work with diligence, tending to patients day after day, never imagining that one day she would be thrust into a world where survival itself would become a daily battle. Her compassion and courage, honed in quiet service, would soon meet a test far beyond anything she had ever faced. By the winter of 1941, the Japanese military had begun rapidly advancing through Southeast Asia, and the city of Singapore, Margaret's home for over a decade, faced imminent invasion. The hospital corridors she had walked for years would soon become corridors of fear, uncertainty, and captivity. And yet, in this young nurse, there was a seed of resilience, creativity, and unwavering humanity. A seed that would grow in the darkness, giving hope to countless women trapped in unimaginable circumstances. This was the woman who, in the coming years, would turn despair into music, suffering into defiance, and captivity into a story of survival that still resonates today. By late 1941, the shadow of war had reached Singapore. The Japanese Empire, driven by ambition and strategy, had begun a rapid and ruthless advance through Southeast Asia. Cities, towns, and villages were falling, and Singapore, known as the Gibraltar of the East, was about to face its greatest test. Margaret Dryburgh, still dedicated to her patients, worked tirelessly in the hospital. The wards were overcrowded, supplies were dwindling, and every day brought news of approaching enemy forces. She watched as soldiers, civilians, and even her own colleagues prepared for the worst. Despite the fear in the air, Margaret remained a beacon of calm, comforting patients and staff alike. In December 1941, the Japanese invasion began in earnest. Bombs rained down, and the once bustling streets of Singapore transformed into zones of chaos. Hospitals became shelters, and nurses like Margaret faced impossible choices: tend to the injured under fire or seek safety for themselves. By February 1942, the situation had become critical. Japanese forces surrounded the city, and British defences were overwhelmed. Civilians and military personnel alike surrendered under the weight of hopelessness, and Margaret, along with her fellow nurses, was taken as a prisoner of war. The moment of capture was surreal. The hospital corridors she had walked for years were now patrolled by armed guards, and the nurses were herded into cramped holding areas. There were no warnings, no time to prepare, only the cold, crushing reality of captivity. Life as a POW began immediately. The Japanese captors were strict, often cruel, and completely indifferent to the suffering of their prisoners. Margaret and the other women were forced into overcrowded quarters, given minimal food and subjected to the harsh tropical heat. Disease spread quickly, and the lack of sanitation made even the simplest tasks a struggle. Despite these conditions, Margaret did what she had always done. She adapted, organised, and cared for those around her. She shared rations when she could, comforted those in despair, and quickly became a quiet leader among the prisoners. Her presence was a lifeline for many women who had lost everything: their homes, their freedom, and their families. Even in these first days of captivity, Margaret's resilience was clear. She refused to let fear dominate her spirit. Every day she observed the camp, learned the routines, and looked for ways to keep hope alive, no matter how small. The fall of Singapore marked not just a military defeat, but the beginning of a brutal chapter for thousands of women like Margaret, who would endure hunger, disease, and dehumanization. And yet, amidst this darkness, a seed of resistance and hope was quietly taking root, one that would later manifest in a way the Japanese captors could never anticipate. Life in the POW camp was a relentless test of endurance. For Margaret Dryburgh and her fellow nurses, every day began with uncertainty and pain. The tropical sun beat down on the corrugated metal huts, turning them into ovens by day and damp, mosquito-infested traps by night. Overcrowding was severe. Dozens of women crammed into spaces meant for a fraction of that number. Food was scarce and of the poorest quality. Rice or small portions of watery gruel became the daily norm. Starvation was constant, leaving prisoners weak, dizzy, and susceptible to disease. Dysentery, malaria, and other illnesses spread quickly, claiming lives in silent waves. Medical supplies were nearly non-existent, and Margaret often had to improvise treatments, using scraps of cloth, leaves, or anything she could find to tend to the sick. The Japanese guards were strict and often brutal. Any perceived disobedience, a whispered conversation, a misaligned formation, or a late response could result in beatings. Fear hung in the air like a heavy fog. Yet Margaret remained calm and composed, offering reassurance to the terrified women around her. Her presence was a source of courage in a place designed to crush it. Days were monotonous, yet filled with small horrors: forced labour, inspections, and the constant knowledge that disease and exhaustion could strike at any moment. Letters from home were rare, and news from the outside world was almost non-existent. Many prisoners lost touch with their families entirely. The psychological toll was as severe as the physical suffering, and yet, even in this darkness, Margaret's mind refused to be broken. She observed carefully, learning the routines of the guards, noting when small freedoms could be taken, and quietly thinking about ways to lift spirits and preserve humanity. Every act of kindness, every whispered encouragement, became a tiny rebellion against the cruelty surrounding them. In the midst of fear and despair, she noticed something remarkable. Music could reach where words could not. Even a faint hum, a whispered song, or the memory of a hymn could bring a momentary escape from the relentless suffering. Margaret began to realize that hope, like food and water, could be a lifeline, and she started planning how to make that lifeline tangible for the women in her care. It was here, in the suffocating heat, filth, and fear, that the seed of something extraordinary took root, a seed that would transform captivity from a story of despair into a tale of resilience, defiance, and hope through music. Amid the oppressive heat, starvation, and despair, Margaret Dryburgh began to notice something profound. Music could heal in ways medicine could not. A faint hum, a whispered hymn, a remembered tune. Even the smallest melody seemed to lift the spirits of women broken by captivity. Margaret, a deeply religious and musically talented woman, decided to turn this realization into action. Using scraps of paper, torn from notebooks or old forms, she began to write down melodies and hymns. Some prisoners had fragments of instruments, a broken piano key, a string from a discarded instrument, or even improvised percussion. Margaret combined these fragments into a makeshift choir that could perform quietly, safely, within the camp walls. The first gatherings were small. A few brave voices joined her, trembling with fear that guards might overhear them. Yet the effect was immediate. As the notes floated through the huts, a sense of calm settled over the prisoners. They sang not just to pass the time, but to defy the hopelessness imposed upon them. The songs became a lifeline. Women who were weak from malnutrition suddenly felt their spirits rise. Those suffering from illness experienced moments of joy and solidarity. Even the fear of guards seemed to recede when the choir began, if only for a few precious minutes each day. But this was more than comfort. For Margaret and the prisoners, the choir was an act of subtle resistance. Singing together reminded them that they were human. that they could still assert control over their minds and souls in a place designed to strip them of both. Each note, each harmony, was a quiet rebellion against the cruelty that surrounded them. As weeks passed, more women joined the choir. Margaret taught them harmony, rhythm, and expression, often adapting songs to the limited voices and makeshift instruments available. They created a repertoire of hymns, spirituals, and folk songs, melodies that reminded them of home, faith, and resilience. Even under the watchful eyes of their captors, Margaret's choir thrived. It became a centre of hope, a private sanctuary where prisoners could forget hunger, fear, and pain for just a few moments. And in the darkest corners of the camp, the music spread quietly, lifting the hearts of those who needed it most. Through song, Margaret had discovered a profound truth. Even in captivity, even under cruelty and starvation, the human spirit could shine. And sometimes, a single voice could ignite hope for hundreds. As the choir grew stronger, so did the risks. The Japanese guards were suspicious of gatherings. In the eyes of the captors, any organization among prisoners could be seen as a threat, a spark of rebellion. Even the faintest melody carried the danger of punishment. Margaret understood the stakes. A single note heard by the wrong person could mean beatings, solitary confinement, or worse. Yet, despite the fear, she refused to stop. The choir was no longer just music. It was a lifeline, a rebellion, and a statement of humanity in a place designed to strip that very essence away. She carefully planned the sessions. Songs were sung quietly, in corners or hidden rooms, sometimes muffled under blankets. Prisoners communicated through subtle gestures to indicate safe times to gather. Margaret's leadership became critical. She guided the singers, coordinated rehearsals, and ensured that no one drew unnecessary attention. The act of singing itself became resistance. Every note defied the oppression. Every harmony asserted dignity in the face of dehumanization. Prisoners who had lost hope began to find courage again. The choir reminded them that, even in captivity, they still possessed minds, voices, and hearts that the guards could not control. The women learned to be resourceful and discreet. They would hide music sheets in clothing, improvise instruments from scraps, and teach songs orally to avoid leaving evidence. Some nights, the melodies floated through the hut so subtly that even other prisoners felt the uplift without anyone knowing where it came from. Margaret's courage inspired others to small acts of defiance. Simple gestures, sharing a hidden ration, encouraging a sick friend, or teaching a song to a new prisoner, became threads in a larger tapestry of resistance. Together, the women carved pockets of hope in a place of despair. Yet every day was a battle. The guards were unpredictable. Punishments could strike without warning. And still, Margaret pressed on, believing that the risk was worth it, that music could keep spirits alive, preserve humanity, and give prisoners a reason to survive another day. Through song, Margaret and the women POWs proved something extraordinary. Even under the harshest tyranny, courage and creativity could flourish, and the human spirit could resist in ways the enemy could never anticipate. As days turned into weeks, the choir became more than just a secret activity. It became the heartbeat of the camp. For Margaret Dryburgh and the women under her care, music was no longer simply a comfort. It was a force that sustained life itself. Prisoners spoke of how even a single hymn could lift the weight of despair. Women who were too weak from starvation would sit upright, swaying gently to the melodies, finding strength they had thought lost forever. The act of singing, of joining voices together, reminded them that they were still human, still capable of emotion, hope, and defiance. Margaret's leadership extended beyond teaching notes or harmonies. She observed her fellow prisoners, knowing which women were too fragile to sing, who needed encouragement, and who could lift the others' spirits. She became a guiding presence, a quiet source of reassurance and resilience in a place designed to erase individuality. The choir also became a symbol of unity. Women from different countries, backgrounds, and walks of life joined together. British nurses sang alongside Australian, Dutch, and even some local women interned in the camp. Despite language barriers and cultural differences, the music created bonds stronger than fear, hunger, or oppression. Stories from the camp tell of nights when the music echoed through the huts, and prisoners would close their eyes and imagine home. The sound of church bells, the rustle of trees, or laughter from their families. In those moments, the horrors of captivity faded, replaced by hope, courage, and a fleeting sense of freedom. Even guards, though they rarely acknowledged it, could not ignore the resilience of these women. The choir's presence was subtle resistance, proof that the spirit of humanity could not be completely crushed. And for Margaret, each note, each harmony, was a reminder of why survival mattered, not just for herself, but for everyone who drew strength from her courage. Through song, the prisoners discovered something extraordinary, that even under extreme suffering the human spirit could triumph, that hope could take root in the darkest places, and that one person's courage could ignite the courage of hundreds. Margaret had transformed despair into a tool for survival. Her choir was no longer merely a secret. It had become the lifeblood of the women in captivity, a beacon of light in a world of shadows. Time in the camp was merciless. The relentless heat, starvation, and disease began to take their toll on even the strongest prisoners. Margaret Dryburgh, despite her unwavering spirit, was not immune. She had poured every ounce of her energy into sustaining others, often putting her own needs last. Her health began to decline. Malnutrition, exhaustion, and tropical illnesses weakened her body. Yet even as her strength waned, her resolve never faltered. She continued to organize choir sessions, teach songs, and encourage the women around her. Every note sung, every harmony achieved was a defiance of death itself. Tragically, Margaret would not survive the war. She passed away in captivity, leaving a void in the hearts of the women she had inspired. Her death was mourned deeply, but her influence endured far beyond her lifetime. The choir she nurtured continued, carrying her spirit through the camp and providing hope until liberation came. Her story, preserved in the letters, diaries, and memoirs of fellow prisoners, serves as a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and creativity. Margaret Dryburgh had demonstrated that even in the most oppressive conditions, one person could ignite hope, inspire resistance, and preserve humanity. The women who survived carried her lessons with them. They spoke of Margaret not just as a nurse or a prisoner, but as a beacon of resilience, someone who proved that even in the darkest times, the human spirit could shine through song, solidarity, and selfless sacrifice. Her life reminds us of a profound truth. Sometimes, heroism is quiet, unnoticed, yet immeasurably powerful. Margaret Dryburgh's courage was not fought with weapons or armies, but with music, leadership, and unwavering compassion, tools that saved lives and lifted souls when the world seemed determined to break them. When World War II finally ended, the survivors of the camps emerged into a world forever changed. For many, the horrors they endured left scars both seen and unseen. Yet amidst the suffering, memories of courage, hope, and resilience endured, and none more profoundly than the legacy of Sister Margaret Dryburgh. Her name lives on not only in historical records, but in the stories, letters, and memoirs of the women she inspired. They spoke of her tireless care, her gentle leadership, and the secret choir that had brought music and hope into the darkest days of captivity. Through these accounts, Margaret's influence spread far beyond the walls of the Sumatra camp. Today, historians and educators remember her as a symbol of humanity in extremity. Her life exemplifies the power of creativity and compassion, how one person, armed with nothing but determination and ingenuity, can preserve dignity, morale, and spirit in the face of overwhelming adversity. The songs she helped teach, and the courage she instilled survived her, echoing in the voices of women who endured similar horrors across the world. Margaret's story reminds us that heroism does not always come from the battlefield. Sometimes it comes from a single voice lifted in defiance, a hymn sung in secret, and the courage to give hope when all seems lost. Her story continues to inspire generations, a testament to the enduring truth that even in captivity, even in the darkest hours, the human spirit can rise, resist, and shine. Sister Margaret Dryburgh may have perished in a prisoner of war camp, but through music, courage, and love, she achieved immortality, a legacy that continues to echo in every tale of resilience, hope, and the power of the human heart.